I've been on YouTube for close to 7 years now, and it's true what they say, you gotta spend money to make money. If you're gonna sling content, you gotta get out there and experience new things. And over the last 8 years, I've taken some pretty wicked coaster trips. However, not all trips are equal. I've done a video about road trip tips, but I've never talked about how good or bad these trips turned out to be, so let's do that today. These are my top 10 coaster road trips. First, I want to thank my Patreons and my new members, Alan Pollock, Chase Williams, and Slipmaker. If you want bonus access, bonus content, behind the scenes videos, a shout out when you join, and your name on this fancy Patreon screen, follow the link below and join. Thanks to Vosman for this video idea. I've also taken a lot more than 10 coaster road trips, but some of these were kind of short or kind of small. I did a Florida trip in 2012, 2018, and 2021. One was the Do Fun Spot, Busch Gardens, and SeaWorld. Another was 4 Velocicoaster's opening and Wild Adventures. And of course, my honeymoon in 2012, hitting up Magic Kingdom, Epcot, both Universal Parks and SeaWorld, but I did spend half that trip pretty sick. I got to Australia last winter. Not really a road trip though, only 16 coasters on that entire trip. But it was also really nice to see Sydney and go to a cricket match. In 2022, I wanted to go to the opening of Lost Island, but that got pushed back a week and I couldn't move my trip. So, me and the family just had a great time going to Valley Fair, Mall of America, Como Town, a Twins game, heading back down to Oklahoma and hitting up Adventureland and Worlds of Fun. Finally, as a follow-up to my epic 2018 road trip that I'll talk about later, I had a spring 2019 redemption trip across the southeast, taking advantage of super cheap flights from LAX to Atlanta, revisiting Six Flags Over Georgia, getting back to Dollywood the year after striking out on Lightning Rod, finally getting back on that, on to Carowinds to ride the brand new Copperhead Strike, and then 2 parks we had to skip the year prior, Busch Gardens Williamsburg and Six Flags America. That amazing day spawning one of my most popular videos, asking if Six Flags America was really that bad. My first real road trip came in June 2017. No flights involved in this one. Me and my brother just getting in the car and driving to Texas and back. Everything was new to me on that trip. From Cliffs in Albuquerque to Six Flags Over Texas and Fiesta, Texas. Finally getting to those parks I heard so much about. Riding 2 new RMCs and riding Switchback at ZDTs and seeing the Alamo. All before going into a 24-hour straight shot back home. Okay, here's the top 10. Number 10, August 2019, the Pacific Northwest. I normally don't travel this late in the season, but I really wanted to line up a trip to visit the Washington State Fair and still have the parks open during the week. I found out, yes, this is possible if you leave the last week of August. The girls joined us for this one, going to the Grand Canyon first, then driving up to Lagoon. Sophie had just ridden her first looping coaster and she rode some more here, including Wicked and Colossus. At the age of 6, she actually rode every coaster except for Cannibal. The girls flew home from Salt Lake City and me and my brother continued on to Silverwood. That's about an 8-hour drive from Lagoon. We spent a good chunk of time driving through Montana, and it just pointed out the stark difference between the western and eastern US. Everything is so packed in on the east side, and on the west side, you're driving for hours and ending up with very little. We got to northern Idaho and Silverwood, and it was worth it. The ops were slow, the rides were good, not great. But hey, I got to Silverwood, and that's what matters. We stopped by RMC headquarters just to see where the magic happens. And then we shot all the way across Washington State, going into Canada to get some credits at Cultus Lake, going to a very packed P&E Playland to ride a bucket list coaster for me, Coaster. That was insane. Got to see Wild Waves and the Washington State Fair on its opening day. Headed back down the coast to Oaks Park to ride Adrenaline Peak, but on the way to Enchanted Forest, we had a tire explode in Portland. That caused a big delay to get that fixed, but still made it to Enchanted Forest. Such a weird park, got soaked on the log flume coaster, and had a late night drive to Six Flags Discovery Kingdom. We spent a day and a half there, and that trip made me really like this park. That was an awesome time, and of course, I got to ride Harley Quinn right before it bit the dust. So, way too much driving for way too few coasters, but we did have some unforgettable and hard to get experiences. Number 9, August 2023, Scandinavia. This was my first non-North American coaster experience. I was looking to branch out, but wasn't too confident traveling overseas, so the perfect option was joining the coaster crew. Tim Halloran runs this group and he organizes everything. All I had to do was find my way to Copenhagen. I did almost miss my connector in Stockholm. Not my fault. It was a crazy insane line for passport checks. But once I got there, it was just 9 crazy days with 70 coaster nerds, hitting up the best parks in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. This trip would have been a lot better had it not been for the storm of the century. That made it very cold and wet for half the trip. That all but wrecked our day at Farup Summerland, canceled our awesome ferry ride to Norway, so we had to take an overnight bus to Tusenfryd. But through all that pain, it brought our group closer. I got to visit a bucket list park in Leesburg, ride a bucket list coaster on Wildfire, and by the time we got to Groenland, we had all pretty much become lifelong friends, and I hope to see a lot of those guys this summer when the coaster crew hits Japan. Number 8, June 2016, my return to the Midwest. In 2002, I went on a road trip with my dad that spanned from Cedar Point to Paramount's Kings Island to Holiday World, all the way to Six Flags Worlds of Adventure. Not long after this, I fell out of the coaster world and it took me over 10 years to find my way back in. It was fitting that my first true coaster trip as an adult was very similar to my first one, this time with my wife, starting at Cedar Point. That was my first time in 8 years. Then, on to Kings Island, my first time in 14 years. I was joking, it took a literal lifetime to get back to Kings Island. I was 14 the first time around and was right back there 14 years later. Leading up to this trip, we were closely watching the progress of Lightning Rod. We were going to be at Dollywood on June 15th no matter what, and we were so lucky that it opened 2 days before we got there. And yes, we got to ride Lightning Rod in its original form. Then, off to Holiday World for my first time since 2002, my first rides on the voyage, and ending at Six Flags Great America, my second time there but my first time riding Goliath. This trip was all about fun. I wasn't on YouTube or Instagram, just reliving my childhood and remembering why I love parks and coasters so much. Number 7, July 2024, the Great Adventure 50th Anniversary Trip. This obviously was just this past year, 17 days, with the main goal to go to Great Adventure and shoot footage for my documentary, checking out everything they had for their 50th anniversary, but also getting a lot of great experiences on the way to Jersey. That included my first trip to Beach Bend to ride Kentucky Rumbler, getting my first night ride on the Beast, riding Skyrush with a brand new lap bars, finally riding Flying Turns at Knoebels, having a good, full day at American Dreams Nickelodeon Universe when they had most of their rides open, experiencing Sesame Place, Dutch Wonderland, and Adventure Park USA for the first time, finally having an awesome experience at Six Flags America, and finally, of course, trying out Lightning Rod's new lift chain. On this trip, Sophie hit 300 coasters on our last day, having to ride Mystery Mine twice because we got evac'd on the second lift. Amy finally ready to ride kiddie coasters and reaching 11 by the end. So, aside from running over something on the freeway in North Carolina and tearing up the underside of our car, it was a very successful trip. Number 6, August 2020, the Hollywood Nights trip. Yeah, 2020 was a big bust for obvious reasons. I had a big trip planned into Canada. I was going to Hollywood Nights for the first time, and I was going to Orion's grand opening at Kings Island. But when all was said and done, I had to take what I could get. Once the park started reopening and Hollywood Nights was moved from late May to late August, I made a full trip out of it. I had to slap together a plan to hit parks that were open, and in the end, it worked out amazing. We started at Cedar Point, that being my final time riding Top Thrill Dragster, headed down to Holiday World, got my Voyage Trimless night ride. Then, on to Keys to the Kingdom. That was Kentucky Kingdom's YouTuber event and that was a lot of fun. Meeting up with guys like Taylor, Logan, Sean Flaherty, getting some rides together and doing a Q&A in their auditorium. We went to Hershey Park to ride Candemonium in its opening year, took a flight to Silver Dollar City, that park was empty during the week in early September, drove to Tulsa to see my new house before we moved in, then drove down to San Antonio to hit up SeaWorld in Fiesta, Texas, back up to Over, Texas, and took another flight back to Ohio to Kings Island for Labor Day to ride Orion, flying home that night. We ended up on 4 planes in just over a week, but I got to hit the 2 big enthusiast events, got to visit Cedar Point, and got to ride the big new American B&Ms, Candemonium and Orion. Number 5, July 2022, the Disney World trip. Up to this point, I had only been to Disney World once, only went to Epcot and Magic Kingdom, and that was back in 2012. This time I got to bring the girls. We got a 4-day pass, but that was just the grand finale of that trip. We started by driving to Dollywood on day 1, getting back on Lightning Rod for the first time in 3 years. And this was the day Sophie became a true coaster fan, being brave enough to ride Lightning Rod at night. And from there, she's been pretty much down to ride anything. This trip also included my first rides in the brand new Pantheon, the brand new Iron Gwazi, and the brand new Icebreaker, throwing in King's Dominion, Carowinds, and Six Flags Over Georgia in the middle. Disney World was awesome, getting to experience Animal Kingdom and Hollywood Studios for the first time. 1 full day at each park, the girls loved it, and even with all the challenges of traveling with a 10-month-old, we all had a good time. There were a few meltdowns, but I think we all look back with fondness on that trip. We did get rear-ended by a hit-and-run driver in Georgia. That guy actually damaged our bumper and we had to tape it back on so it wasn't flapping around, but it could have been way worse. Number 4, June 2023, my return to Canada's Wonderland. This trip required a very expensive trip to the post office, getting everyone's passport situation in order because Canada was back open after COVID, and the whole family was going to Canada's Wonderland. On the way, I got to ride the brand new Zambezi Zinger, finally got to Lost Island after missing out in its opening year. We all loved that park. Got Sophie to Six Flags Great America for the first time, And then, on to Canada we went. This was back when the wildfires were burning down the entire country. So all my footage that looks cloudy, that's not clouds, that's smoke. Canada's Wonderland was epic as usual. We went up to the CN Tower, went to Marineland for the first time, and got in the awesome Dragon Mountain. And that night, we got to see Niagara Falls for the first time. That was super cool. We ended that trip with a long overdue return to Darien Lake, Hershey Park to ride the brand new Wildcat's Revenge. We missed Kennywood because of weather. That was too bad, but we made up for it this year. And got Sophie to Cedar Point for the first time, which is a total rite of passage for every enthusiast. The timing of this trip was set to line up so we hit Strickers Grove on the 4th of July, something I've been wanting to do for a long time. And we ended with a long overdue trip to Six Flags St. Louis. There were no wasted experiences here. This one was a bit shorter than the other trips, about a week and a half. And when it came to car trouble, we did have our battery die at Hershey Park, so of course, I blame Skyrush. Number 3, June 2008, the Non-enthusiast trip. If you know my story, I was a coaster fan in the early 2000s, fell out of the coaster game after I started working at Magic Mountain in 2003. But 5 years later, when I had the chance to take a vacation to the East Coast and visit some of the parks I used to read so much about, I had to do it. This was a guy's trip. Me, my brother, and my dad. We started off going to Busch Gardens and Kings Dominion for the first time. It would be the first and last time I would ever ride Big Bad Wolf and Volcano. Also, got my first taste of Six Flags America and Great Adventure. Of course, I had a religious experience in my first El Toro ride. That was an immediate number 1. Finally got to ride the legendary Coney Island Cyclone. Also, got to Dorney Park for the first time and Cedar Point for the first time in 6 years. Getting to ride Maverick and Dragster for the first time. Those weren't open when I first went in 2002. That trip also got me to Camden Yards in Baltimore, the old Yankee Stadium in its final year, and Citizens Bank Park in Philly. And I got to explore New York City and Washington, D.C. for the first time. All around, a well-rounded trip full of new experiences. Number 2, July 2021, completing the Cedar Fair and American Six Flags Gauntlet. This makes the most sense if you know what number 1 is, but let's just say, this trip filled in all the gaps that I was missing. I had just moved to Oklahoma. My brother flew into Kansas City and I went to pick him up, and we took a 19-day trip all across the Midwest and East Coast in my 2015 Ford Fiesta. We started at Worlds of Fun, of course, it was right there. But then we went on to my first ever time to Adventureland. Then Valley Fair, the Mall of America, Michigan's Adventure, Lakemont, Idlewild, Great Escape, Coney Island, the whole park, not just the Cyclone, all the major Jersey boardwalks. I rode Firebird, which was the last B&M I was missing in America. All those experiences were completely new to me. Plus, we got to do a bunch of other parks on the way. Indiana Beach, Bay Beach, Mount Olympus, Cedar Point, Kennywood, Knoebels, Six Flags New England, Quasi, Great Adventure, Carowinds, over Georgia. But the big achievement was getting to Valley Fair and Michigan's Adventure and Great Escape. Officially going to every park in the Cedar Fair chain and all the American Six Flags parks. I'm still missing La Run and Six Flags Mexico, so maybe one day. The Fiesta had a leaky tire the last few days. We had to keep an eye on that. We spent a lot of time trying to find a tire shop that could help us. But in the end, I had to just rip off all the tires and get new ones after we got home. Number 1, July 2018, the cross-country trip. Me and my brother planned this trip 17 months in advance, and it just kept getting longer and longer, ending up spanning from July 4th to July 28th. The goal was to leave California, drive to the East Coast, and hit every major park on the way, mostly for the first time. This was the trip that launched my YouTube channel. I created this in February 2018. I expected to start posting once I got back, but I started early just to start talking about that trip and what I was looking forward to. Up to this point, I had only been to a handful of parks, and of the ones I had been to, it had been at least 10 years since I'd been back. I was seeing Elitch Gardens for the first time, same with Worlds of Fun, Six Flags St. Louis, Kentucky Kingdom, Canada's Wonderland, Darien Lake, Fantasy Island, Waldameer, Conneaut Lake, Kennywood, Hershey Park, Knoebels, Lake Compounds, Quasi, Carowinds, Six Flags Over Georgia, Silver Dollar City, Frontier City, and Wonderland. Think about walking into all these major parks for the first time, a new spectacular experience every day. Not to mention coming back to Cedar Point, Holiday World, Kings Island, Dollywood, and hitting up Dorney Park and Kings Dominion for the first time in 10 years. 2018 was huge in general. I picked up 170 new credits over the course of a few trips, but after that 3.5-week road trip spanning almost 8,000 miles, I felt like I had seen enough to start doing rankings and make a YouTube channel worth watching. I have never looked forward to a trip as much as that one, and the whole thing is etched in my memory. I could tell you every park we went to and what date we were there, even what coaster shirt I was wearing for all 25 days. It was a one-of-a-kind trip. Safe to say, I'll never do anything that crazy again. Oh, and when it came to car problems, we did run over a suicidal raccoon on the way to Cedar Point. That messed up the brakes in the car, but luckily I wasn't driving. So there you have it, my top 10 coaster trips. If you have any comments on any of these trips, or if you want to share your most epic coaster trip, sound off in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like, and if you're new here and love coasters, please give me a sub. Also, check out my second channel, where I post copyright-free off-ride footage. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.